Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and with all this Flynn stuff coming out, it seems like everyone's trying to talk again about the Russian hacking and everyone making a big deal about it. And, that's kind of a interesting thing because I'm not buying into a lot of this, and I'm not buying into it. And here's why I'm not even concerned so much that Russia tried to influence the elections. People go, oh my God, why would you say that? How could you say that? Because our election, the last couple elections have been massively influenced by foreign governments on the other side. Why aren't we talking about that? Why are we making a big deal about the Russians who had less influence on the elections, even if this is true, than other foreign interests had on the other side? What do I mean? Look at who paid for these campaigns. All right? Look at who paid for these campaigns. Hillary Clinton, 25% of her initial campaign was funded by a single Saudi Arabian royal. Look how much money George Soros gave to her. That's a foreign interest, guys. George Soros is definitely not American, all right? Yeah, he's extremely wealthy, but he's not an American, and he funds terrorist groups. Hell, he's funded Black Lives Matter. He owned a bunch of the voting machines. So we start talking about voter fraud, and we have someone who owns a company that made a fourth of the voting machines, who funds terrorist groups and gave millions of dollars to Hillary's campaign. Yeah, that's a reason we start talking about voter fraud. He owns those machines. We don't know how they've been tampered with. So you need to think about that for a moment. So you start talking about foreign interests doing that. Look how many millions was given to Hillary's campaign by the Saudis. Look how many foreign interests own some of the media outlets that were promoting Hillary and pumping out false information. Look how much money the United Arab Emirates gave to Hillary. Half of her campaign was paid for by foreign people, by foreigners in other countries. So we're going to stand here and talk about our elections being influenced by foreigners, by other interests. Think about that for a moment. The sheer hypocrisy of talking about this when we don't talk about it on the other side. Look how much of Obama's campaign was paid for. Obama was bought and paid for by Middle Eastern interests. Bought and paid for. Why do you think he refuses to say the word Islamic terrorism? Ever. He's bought and paid for by Middle Eastern interests. By big oil over there. He's bought and paid for. Hillary was the same way. Half of her campaign, which was the most expensive presidential campaign in history, the most expensive presidential campaign in the entire history of our country was her campaign. She still lost. And that's the publicly admitted funds. Half of it came from overseas. Half of her campaign money. You don't think that's foreign interest interfering with a campaign? How about we have a law put in place? You want to talk about foreign interests. We want to talk about the Russians. Let's have some campaign reform then. Let's have a campaign reform that says you can't take money from foreigners. That only American citizens and American-owned businesses can contribute to your campaign. How about we do that? Until we do that, we have no business talking about foreign interests interfering in our elections. Jesus Christ. I mean, think about that. Most expensive campaign in the history of our country, and half of it was paid for by foreigners. And then we get into the potential of voter fraud when you have a foreigner who gives millions of dollars to her campaign, owning a bunch of the voting machines themselves, actually owning them. We don't have checks and balances in place there. So, yeah, when we start talking about countries that don't have our best interest in mind, and then we start talking about the Russians, how about the Russians were concerned that Hillary was going to declare World War III on them? And you know what? When it comes down to it, the American people voted for Trump partially because we actually care about Islamic terrorism. And now he's just got up and said in his inauguration that he's going to wipe out Islamic radical terrorism. He's going to wipe it out. You know what? The Russians have said the same thing last year and the year before that. Now, the left is sitting here concerned and freaking out because they may have influenced the elections. We're on the same side as them. Our right wing in this country is on the same side as the Russians. We recognize a bigger enemy. And they want to make them the enemy. They want to get in a war with them when they're sitting here saying, look, we understand we have a common enemy. We need to deal with this. And they want to fight with them all the time. And you know what? I don't care about some of their interests in Europe. Everyone's like, well, they can't have Crimea or whatever. They can't do this. Look, they're going to take back some of their traditional lands. And people are sitting there talking about Europe. I'm at the point, I don't care about Europe anymore. Europe has embraced Islamic extremism. They're allowing Islamic extremists to pour into their countries. Their governments are not on our side. They're not on our side anymore. They aren't. A lot of their people might, but their governments aren't. Why are we concerned about Europe anymore? It's on the side that most of us recognize as the enemy. It's not interested in combating Islamic extremism. It's welcoming it in its doors. They're bringing them into their countries. They're ready to be taken over. And yeah, we need to have a concern about that because those are nuclear powers. Any of them get overtaken by these extremist interests, we've got a real problem, don't we? You know, people worried about them firing cruise missiles, the Russians testing a cruise missile. You know what? Maybe they're getting ready to have to deal with threats in the Middle East. They're going to need those long-range missiles. Maybe that's what they're getting ready to do. People take that as an attack upon us. Look, the Russians want to ally with us. They're trying to legitimately form an alliance with us, a mutually beneficial alliance at this point, to deal with common enemies. So I'm not concerned about them influencing the election a little bit, supposedly, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. Because the other side, people who maybe don't have our best interest in mind, who do fund our mutual enemies, Islamic terrorism, who do fund it, paid for the other side's election. They paid for it. So, yeah, I'm not overly concerned with someone who wants to neutralize that same enemy, possibly influencing our election when the people who fund a lot of our enemy also funded the other side of the election. All right, there's a lot more going on here than people want to really think about, it looks like. And it's all the news trying to drum this up. The same news that supported Hillary. Same news that supported Hillary is drumming this up. And you know what? Here's the thing. Who's actually saying the Russians leaked all this information and hacked it? Obama's intelligence agency, his leadership. All right, Obama's leadership. I've heard a theory suggested, very plausible theory, has come out in alternative media, that it wasn't leaked. All this stuff, the DNC stuff and all that, wasn't leaked by the Russians to WikiLeaks. Because even WikiLeaks is saying we don't think it was the Russians that did it. There's an alternative theory that it was people within our own intelligence community. That it was people within our own intelligence community, within our own agencies who are tired of this stuff going on, who want to do something about it, who are actual patriots, who saw how bad Hillary was, who leaked all this information internally. Because you know what? You want to talk about who would have access to this information easier than the Russians? Our own intelligence agencies would have a hell of a lot more access than the Russians could hack. So I'm sorry, but that sounds like a more viable story. And people say, yeah, but their leaders are saying, well, who cares what their leaders are saying? These leaders were appointed by Obama. Obama's on Hillary's side. These are his leadership that he put into power who are saying this. This is Obama's intelligence community saying this. He wanted Hillary to win. That was his candidate. She was his protege, so to speak, funded by all the same people in his cabinet, one of his most trusted advisors. Yeah, so his intelligence agency is saying, oh, the Russians did it, instead of maybe saying that maybe their own people did it. People further down the chain in their communities leaked it. Because you know what? You know who would have access to that stuff easier? They would. They would have 50 times more access, being our own local intelligence network, than the Russians would have the ability to hack in. That sounds like a viable story. That sounds like a viable story. So maybe the Russians weren't even involved at all. It's a point to consider. And that's not even necessarily a real conspiracy theory. That's just looking at human nature, looking at the nature of organizations, looking at the nature of leadership in organizations. All the heads of these agencies who are saying, oh, it's the Russians, were appointed by Obama. They're loyal to Obama. They're loyal to his standpoint. They're possibly loyal to Hillary Clinton. Of course they're going to say that, because that's a better story to use to their advantage than saying members of their own agencies leaked this stuff. which is actually more likely. I mean, when you think about how easy it would be for them to get them, there'd be far more members of our own intelligence community who would have easier access to all this material than the Russians having access to it. I think that's a very real possibility. And a lot of them are patriots. A lot of them do love this country within those agencies. And maybe a lot of them saw her as a real threat. Maybe they leaked it. I think that's a very believable story. I think that's a more believable story than the Russians did it. Although I wouldn't discount either one. Honestly, they're both plausible stories. But if I had to say which one sounds more likely, I'd go 60-40. 60-40 on that one. So, why are we sitting here talking about foreign interests influencing the election when all the other foreign interests did it publicly, right there in plain sight, and admitted to all of it on the other side? Hillary was bought and paid for by foreign interests, foreign governments, publicly. So the sheer hypocrisy of this is mind-blowing. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.